The Illuminati conspiracy. Does the Vatican know anything about it? An all-seeing eye carved into stone, beneath centuries of silence. It's a symbol that has become almost cinematic, an eye surrounded by radiant beams, watching from pyramids, cathedrals, currency, and the corners of conspiracy theories. But what does it truly mean? More importantly, does it point to something hidden in the archives of the Vatican itself? As a scientist and documentarian, I've spent decades investigating ancient artifacts, iconography, and claims of hidden truths, all without agenda. And today I invite you to step into this investigation, not as believers or skeptics, but as observers of history, art, and the strange crossroads between fact and fiction. Let's begin with the name that triggers so many imaginations, the Illuminati. The Bavarian birth of a modern myth. The word Illuminati is often used without historical context. It evokes images of cloaked figures in underground chapels, pulling the strings of governments and religious powers alike. But to understand the roots, we must leave fiction behind for a moment and travel to Bavaria, 1776. On May 1st of that year, a professor of canon law named Adam Weishaupt founded what he called the Order of the Illuminati. His goal was not to summon ancient powers or infiltrate the Vatican. It was, in fact, Enlightenment-driven. He wanted to promote reason, liberty, and secular morality in a time when monarchs in the church still held tremendous sway over the lives and minds of people. Weishaupt's Illuminati was a product of its time, influenced by the likes of Voltaire, Rousseau, and the Masonic lodges already active across Europe. The group operated more like an intellectual society, a private network promoting freedom of thought in a deeply stratified world. By 1785, the order was banned by the Bavarian government, and by all accounts, it dissolved soon after. The entire lifespan of the original Illuminati, less than 10 years. So how did such a short-lived organization become the focus of centuries of speculation? Masonic links and the language of symbols. To understand this, we must examine the symbolic universe that surrounded groups like the Illuminati and how those symbols evolved over time. The Enlightenment period saw the rise of Freemasonry as both a social and philosophical force. These fraternal organizations used symbolism derived from operative masonry, tools like the compass and square, to represent ethical and metaphysical ideas. Many Masonic rites, intentionally or not, borrowed language and symbolism that mirrored religious or even esoteric practices. Adam Weishaupt admired Freemasonry, but also wanted to reform it. Some members of his Illuminati were Masons themselves, and this overlap created a feedback loop. Outsiders often couldn't distinguish between the two. Over time, the terms became interchangeable in the minds of critics, especially within more conservative or religious factions. It is here that suspicion was born. If these groups spoke in codes, used secret handshakes, and operated outside traditional institutions, surely they must be hiding something. And when revolutions erupted, in America, France, and beyond, some claim these illuminated thinkers were the puppet masters behind the upheaval. Never mind the fact that no concrete evidence linked the historical Illuminati to any of these political events. The idea had taken root. The Vatican's position: caution, not complicity. It's important to clarify something. The Vatican has never publicly acknowledged any connection with the Illuminati, historical or otherwise. But this hasn't stopped theories from proliferating. Why? Because the Vatican, as both a spiritual center and sovereign state, represents longevity, mystery, and control. Its architecture is filled with symbolism, its libraries hold texts that date back millennia, and its archives are famously inaccessible to the general public. This secrecy has fueled speculation that the church must be hiding something. And when symbols like the eye within a triangle, the keys of Peter, or the obelisk in St. Peter's Square are misread or decontextualized, they can appear to fit the narrative of secret societies and clandestine influence. But here's what a sober analysis reveals. The all-seeing eye, though often cited as an Illuminati symbol, has older origins. It appears in Christian art as the Eye of Providence. symbolizing the omniscience of God. In many churches, including Catholic ones, it's used to represent divine watchfulness, not surveillance by secret powers. The obelisk in Vatican City, sometimes accused of being a pagan or Masonic emblem, is actually an ancient Egyptian monument brought to Rome long before Christianity became the empire's religion. Its presence is historical, not conspiratorial. The double keys emblem used by the Vatican is derived from the Gospel of Matthew, where Christ gives Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Again, symbolic, but entirely theological. To conflate these with Illuminati imagery is to misunderstand both their origin and their intent. A word on the secret archives. One of the most persistent claims about the Vatican is that it hides secret knowledge, suppressed texts, maps, relics, and possibly even proof of secret alliances. Let's be clear, the Vatican Apostolic Archive is real. It contains over 50 miles of shelving, including papal correspondence, state papers, and doctrinal manuscripts. But it is not unbreachable. Scholars with proper credentials and academic goals can request access. It's restricted, but not forbidden. No document has ever surfaced from these archives proving a link between the Vatican and the Illuminati. None. So why does the theory persist? Perhaps because the lack of evidence has become part of the myth. They must be hiding it, some say, because we've never seen it. But as a researcher, I've learned this. Absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, nor is it proof of concealment. Sometimes the simpler answer is the more likely one. Where Hollywood got it right and where it didn't. It's impossible to discuss the public understanding of the Illuminati without addressing the impact of fiction, particularly the works of popular culture that have turned this historical footnote into a full-blown global myth. Perhaps the most influential of these is Dan Brown's novel, Angels and Demons, later adapted into a major motion picture. In it, a secret society, the Illuminati, plots revenge against the Catholic Church using stolen antimatter and centuries-old symbols hidden across Rome. The narrative is tightly woven, fast-paced, and deeply reliant on the tension between science and faith. And while it's meant as entertainment, the reach of such stories has profoundly shaped public perception. So let's look, analytically, at what such works get right and where they drift far from history. First, the setting: Vatican City, its basilicas, archives, and traditions. In Brown's work, the geography is surprisingly well researched. The Church of Santa Maria del Popolo, the Pantheon, and St. Peter's Basilica are all real places, filled with authentic artworks and historical depth. Many of the architectural features described, such as obelisks and embedded symbols, do exist. But here's where the line begins to blur. These elements are not part of a hidden map. They are not breadcrumbs left by an underground Enlightenment sect. They are relics of art, faith, imperial Rome, and centuries of spiritual expression. The eye and triangle symbol, so central to these stories, does appear in religious art, but again, as a symbol of divine providence, not Illuminati surveillance. And the Vatican's preference for Latin inscriptions, cosmic alignment in architecture, and Renaissance geometry often fuels these misunderstandings. What is sacred or symbolic becomes, in the modern mind, secretive. So while fiction like Angels and Demons builds intrigue on historical scaffolding, it does so by overlaying modern fears onto ancient forms. Unpacking the symbols. What's actually in the Vatican? Let's return to symbols. In science, we look not just at what is seen, but what is meant. And here the key lies in context. The Pine Cone Courtyard, for example, a massive bronze pine cone sculpture in Vatican City, is often cited by conspiracy theorists as a third eye symbol or pagan remnant. In truth, it's a Roman artifact, likely symbolizing fertility or eternal life, preserved not because of conspiracy, but because of its artistry and antiquity. Similarly, the obelisk in St. Peter's Square, often called Illuminati architecture, predates Christianity. Brought to Rome by Emperor Caligula, it was later repositioned by Pope Sixtus V in 1586 as part of a broader effort to Christianize the city's classical landscape. If we were to take every reused symbol in Christian art and architecture and reinterpret it without historical training, it would be easy to weave narratives that aren't there. But the task of a researcher, and certainly of a scientific documentarian, is to follow the evidence, not the allure of mystery. The real secret: power, perception, and the archive of ideas. So does the Vatican know anything about the Illuminati? Here's the honest answer. It depends on what we mean by know. There is no evidence, not in manuscripts, not in artwork, not in papal decrees, that suggests the Vatican has ever collaborated with or been influenced by the Bavarian Illuminati. That said, the Church was undoubtedly aware of the movement during its brief existence in the late 1700s. The papal encyclicals of the era often condemned secret societies in general, including Freemasons, Enlightenment clubs, and revolutionary thinkers. But this was rooted in theology and political preservation, not in fear of infiltration. In fact, Pope Pius VII and later Leo XIII issued direct warnings about Freemasonry and rationalist societies, more for their secularism than for any Illuminati affiliation. The concern was clear. These groups were spreading ideas that challenged ecclesiastical authority and moral tradition. So in a way, the Church did recognize these groups, not as hidden puppet masters, but as intellectual adversaries in a time of social transformation. And what of the Vatican archives? Could a stray letter from Adam Weishaupt lie hidden in some forgotten drawer? Conceivably. But that possibility exists in any archive of sufficient size. The existence of the archives, like any well-kept library, does not imply a cover-up. It simply implies record-keeping. The true power of the Illuminati myth. Let me offer a reflection. The staying power of the Illuminati story is not in its truth, but in its utility. It gives structure to chaos. It offers an explanation when the world feels confusing. It provides a narrative of control, of hidden hands guiding events too vast to grasp. In a time when global systems feel impersonal, where institutions seem inaccessible, the idea that someone is behind the curtain becomes almost comforting. But as scientists, as historians, as people in search of clarity, we must resist that temptation. We must learn to sit with uncertainty, to admit what we know and what we do not, to distinguish between mystery and manufactured myth. The real story here, the one worthy of investigation, is not that the Vatican and the Illuminati are colluding in shadows. It's that humans are drawn to symbols, to power, to secrecy, and sometimes to the patterns we project onto the past. The psychology of secrecy: why hidden things shape our imagination. As we continue this exploration, I want to shift our attention from the stone halls of the Vatican and the dusty archives of Enlightenment Europe to something perhaps more elusive: the human mind. Why do we associate power with secrecy? Why do symbols that appear in public spaces, churches, government buildings, even the back of a dollar bill, evoke the sense of something concealed? Because for centuries, secrecy has been equated with influence. When a group keeps its rituals private, when an institution guards its manuscripts, when a government restricts access to its records, our imagination fills the gaps. The less we know, the more we speculate. And this leads to an important principle in the psychology of conspiracy theories. The absence of information is often interpreted as the presence of intention. When the Vatican limits access to its archives, which it does primarily for preservation, not secrecy, some assume those restrictions hide controversial truths. When Masonic lodges perform symbolic rituals in closed rooms, people imagine those rituals must represent something dangerous. When the original Bavarian Illuminati conducted meetings behind locked doors in the 18th century, critics projected motives onto them that exceeded their actual ambitions. But here's the scientific perspective. Secrecy creates mystique, not necessarily motive. Let me give you a parallel. In my decades studying the Shroud of Turin, the cloth wasn't mysterious because of what it concealed. It was mysterious because of what we didn't yet know. And every time we uncovered new data, from reflectance spectroscopy, from high-resolution imaging, from chemical analysis, we replaced speculation with understanding. The same principle applies here. The issues surrounding the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and the Vatican are not fueled by evidence of clandestine coordination. They're fueled by centuries of incomplete knowledge. And human beings by nature fill in the blanks. The Vatican, misunderstood power in the modern age. Now let's focus for a moment on the Church, specifically the Vatican as both a spiritual and political entity. One of the reasons the Vatican attracts conspiracy theories is because it represents a rare kind of institution, an ancient power that still exists in the modern world. Most medieval or Renaissance institutions have vanished or been absorbed by secular governments. The Vatican, however, still possesses unique characteristics. It is a sovereign state. It maintains continuity over centuries. It has a highly formalized hierarchy. It holds archives dating back more than 1,200 years. It communicates selectively, often cautiously. To many, this looks like the infrastructure of a secretive organization. But as someone who has spent years researching historical artifacts and institutions, I can say something important. Longevity does not imply conspiracy. Tradition does not imply secrecy. Structure does not imply manipulation. The Vatican's survival says more about the resilience of cultural identity and religious continuity than about hidden agendas. In fact, most of the Church's administrative work, charitable programs, diplomatic missions, theological publications, is openly conducted and widely documented. Yet because the Vatican has endured while other institutions faded, it inevitably becomes a canvas for projection. Where some see continuity, others see control. Where some see symbolism, others see coded messages. Where some see faith, others see hidden alliances. And this tension between visibility and interpretation is exactly where myths like the Illuminati flourish. The Enlightenment versus the Church, a clash misread by history. Let's return briefly to the late 1700s. The Illuminati, as founded by Adam Weishaupt, was not created to wage war against the Vatican. It was created to promote reason, rationalism, and freedom of thought, ideas the Enlightenment championed. At times, these ideals did conflict with the established power structures of both church and monarchy. But conflict of ideas is not the same as covert warfare. The Church, in turn, responded not to the Illuminati specifically, but to the broader spread of secular philosophies that threatened ecclesiastical authority. Papal letters from the era speak not of a hidden battle with shadow organizations, but of concern that rapid intellectual change would destabilize moral life. In reality, the Vatican and the historical Illuminati represented two ideological poles of the same era, not allies, not enemies, but participants in a cultural transformation. When modern conspiracy theories imagine secret alliances or institutional infiltrations, they overlook one essential truth. The Illuminati disappeared not because it was too powerful, but because it never truly wielded the power it sought. And the Vatican, for its part, continued its mission with or without the presence of Enlightenment societies. History records no partnership, no correspondence, no shared objectives, just two very different responses to the same societal changes. The modern reinvention of the Illuminati. Something fascinating happened in the 20th century. The Illuminati, once a forgotten footnote, was reinvented, not by historians but by popular culture. Comic books, pulp novels, early radio dramas, and later Hollywood blockbusters rekindled the idea that there were hidden forces behind world events. And because the Illuminati had such a compelling name, illuminating, enlightened, elite, it was the perfect candidate for reanimation. Meanwhile, the Vatican remained an equally compelling symbol of old world authority, tradition, and mystery. Put these two cultural icons together, and you have a narrative framework irresistible to fiction writers. But if we separate cultural storytelling from documented history, we find that the Illuminati's presence in the Vatican story is invented. A dramatic device, not a discovery. And this return of the Illuminati in modern imagination says more about us than about the past. In a technologically complex world where global phenomena feel overwhelming, we sometimes search for narratives that simplify the chaos. A secret society offers that simplicity. A powerful institution like the Vatican offers a convenient counterpart. But reality, as always, is both more nuanced and more interesting. Why this matters, the search for truth beyond the myth. Here, let me offer a personal reflection. I've spent my career studying objects and ideas surrounded by controversy. The Shroud of Turin, for example, is one of the most debated artifacts in history. Yet every time we approached it scientifically, through data, through imaging, through rigorous methodology, we found that the truth was often less dramatic, but far more meaningful. The same principle applies here. The question, does the Vatican know anything about the Illuminati, is not just about archives or symbols. It's about our relationship with truth. It asks whether we are willing to let evidence guide our beliefs, even when the evidence is quieter than the myth. And in this search, we are reminded of something essential. Not every mystery hides a secret. Not every symbol hides a society. Not every institution hides an agenda. Sometimes the story we uncover is not the one we imagined, but the one that frees us from imagination's distortions. The paradox of conspiracies, certainty in a world of unknowns. As we bring this exploration toward its final chapters, I'd like to confront what I believe lies at the heart of this and many into conspiracy narratives. It's the paradox of certainty. Conspiracy thinking often presents itself as skepticism, but beneath that surface, it tends to seek absolute clarity, a totalizing explanation that removes ambiguity from the world. There must be someone in control, the logic goes. There must be a plan, and if it's hidden, then it must be them. This longing for control or for explanation often disguises itself as inquiry, when in reality it resists complexity. But history is complex, and the story of the Illuminati, the Church, and the web of myth that connects them is full of inconsistencies, unknowns, and unanswered questions. But none of those, in isolation or in accumulation, confirms the existence of a grand, hidden alliance. Let me give you a scientific analogy. When we study a mysterious object, like the Shroud of Turin or a long-lost artifact, we begin with incomplete data. The temptation is to form a sweeping theory early, then fit every new piece of information into that narrative. But this is a methodological error. It leads us to reinforce what we already believe, rather than to uncover what might actually be true. The same applies to grand narratives about global conspiracies. Once someone believes that the Vatican is hiding something, say a centuries-long relationship with a secret society, every closed door, every painting, every symbol becomes evidence. Not because it proves anything, but because the theory came first and the evidence was shaped to serve it. That, my friends, is not science. That is mythology in modern clothing. The enduring appeal of the Illuminati. Still, we must ask, why does the Illuminati myth persist? It's not simply because of its historical roots. As we've seen, the actual Bavarian Illuminati was short-lived and ideologically transparent. Nor is it due to documentation. No credible source has ever produced verified evidence of their survival into the 19th century, much less their involvement with the Vatican. Instead, the Illuminati idea survives because it is flexible. It can mean different things to different people. To some, it's a symbol of secularism and rebellion. To others, it's a scapegoat for cultural or political anxiety. And in media, it functions as an evergreen villain, a placeholder for all that feels hidden, powerful, and unknowable. The Vatican, on the other hand, serves as a foil in this mythology, the enduring institution, steeped in history, art, and ceremony. Combine the two, and you have a narrative that practically writes itself. But here's what's often lost in that narrative: context. Context is the cornerstone of all serious research. Whether examining a medieval cloth, a fragment of ancient scripture, or a misunderstood painting in the Apostolic Palace, we must ask, what did this mean at the time it was created? Without context, we misinterpret symbols. Without context, we attribute intent where none exists. Without context, we turn history into fantasy, and fantasy into false conviction. What the Vatican does hold. Let's return for a final time to the question that inspired this investigation. Does the Vatican know anything about the Illuminati? From a historical standpoint, yes. The Vatican knew of the group's existence in the late 18th century, as did other institutions across Europe. Their writings were known. Their objectives were criticized. Their short-lived influence was noted. From a symbolic standpoint, no. The Vatican's use of ancient imagery, geometric architecture, and sacred language does not stem from a reference Illuminati ideology. And from a mythological standpoint, that is the space where fiction and fascination take over. The Vatican's vast collections include ancient texts, sacred relics, and cultural records of incalculable value. But no credible scholar working within the archives has ever reported finding material evidence of an enduring Illuminati connection. What we find instead is something perhaps more profound, a record of humanity's ongoing attempt to understand itself through religion, through philosophy, and yes, through secrecy at times, but rarely with the kind of coordinated, clandestine agenda so many conspiracy theories suggest. Final reflection between symbol and substance. Let me leave you with a reflection not about the Illuminati or the Vatican, but about how we approach the unknown. In science, we are trained not to fear questions. We are taught that doubt is not the enemy of knowledge. It is its engine. When I first began examining the Shroud of Turin, I had no answers. Only data, images, spectra, and 1,000 hypotheses. And I learned to love that space between certainty and mystery. We must apply the same discipline here. It is tempting to believe that hidden hands control the world. But the more courageous act, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, is to accept that truth is often harder to find, more nuanced and less organized than fiction suggests. The all-seeing eye may continue to appear on monuments and in movies. Secret societies may still populate our thrillers and digital lore, and institutions like the Vatican will always invite scrutiny, as they should. But at the end of the day, we must ask, are we seeking truth or simply a story that feels like truth? Because truth, in its most honest form, doesn't always come with symbols or seals or revelations. Sometimes it comes as a quiet realization that history is not hiding from us. It's waiting to be read carefully. Closing statement. Sometimes the greatest secrets are not the ones hidden, but the ones misunderstood.